No, you're not going crazy. Nothing feels original anymore. For the last decade or longer, everything just feels the same, whether it's the big movies, music, books, you name it. Another sequel or reboot, another new song that sounds the same as the last big hit, another look that gets a name, a hashtag, a shopping link, and then disappears in a couple of weeks. And the weird part is, it's not because people forgot how to be creative. So, why have we slid into a weirdly stagnant era of pop culture where the present is basically a repackaging of either the recent or distant past? If anything, we've got more tools, more creators, and more access than at any point in history. And yet, it seems the output keeps converging into the same sort of thing, the same safe choices. So today, we're going to look at why that's happening and whether there's hope for human creativity. We'll look at the way the internet rewired everything, how platforms steer attention, how big money entertainment learned to fear risk, and why AI could push this whole thing into overdrive. My name is Guy, and you're watching Coin Bureau Finance. So, to explain why we find ourselves looking at the same stuff over and over again, we need to first look at the internet and how it changed, well, everything. First, think about how pop culture and trends used to travel. If you were into some niche sound, you didn't discover it because a TikTok algorithm determined you were likely to engage. You found it because a friend burned you a CD, Google that if you don't know what I'm talking about, or maybe a late-night radio DJ took a risk and played something a bit different from the usual programming. Things like fashion worked the same way. Cities had their own looks, scenes had their own rules, and crucially, those scenes had time to develop before the rest of the world took notice. And then the internet bulldozed absolutely every element of that. Distribution used to be physical and/or expensive. Things like shelf space and airtime were limited. But online distribution changed that forever, making niche stuff discoverable and shareable at scale without needing a gatekeeper's permission. Now, this shift was a whole new model for media, with unlimited selection, real-time feedback, and audiences finding obscure work that would have been invisible in the old world. But when distribution goes global, so too does imitation. A style, sound, or visual language doesn't stay local anymore. It gets extracted, tagged, clipped, remixed, and pushed into the same global stream where everyone else is constantly searching for inspiration. Internet platforms turned local hits into worldwide sensations. In fact, global streaming giants like Netflix are increasingly relying on local TV shows specifically because they travel better than anyone expected. Now, in some ways, this might sound like a good thing. We get more variety, more choice, and more exposure to other cultures. But in practice, there are some significant side effects as everything ends up competing inside the same interface. When millions of people are looking at the same feed, looking at the same trends, watching the same snippets, referencing the same memes, you get one giant market where the lifespan of these things essentially gets speedrun. Because trends are now born inside the feed, the cycle compresses. In fashion, for example, a microtrend doesn't have to prove itself in a community over a period of several months. It just has to spike for 48 hours and suddenly there are a million copycats. Viral TikTok fashion trends are now seen as a fresh threat to fast fashion leaders because the churn has become chaotic and brutally fast. But leaving the catwalk for a moment, the production side of the internet is the real accelerant. Content production tools got much cheaper and the cost of publishing collapsed. Anyone can now be a creator, which is great in theory, but it also means the supply of content is basically infinite. YouTube's CEO has claimed that over 500 hours of content are uploaded every minute. Music, meanwhile, is the same story but in audio form. Spotify says over 100,000 new songs are released daily, so even tiny slices of attention and revenue get spread across an enormous supply of new content. So, the internet didn't just widen access, It fused the world's cultural pipeline into one chaotic fire hose, and it made copying the easiest and fastest move to make. So, in this day and age, everything is available almost instantly, but as a result, distinctiveness isn't afforded years to develop. Instead, it pretty much only gets minutes to survive. But the internet is only infrastructure, so what is actually driving this ultra-competitive and even cutthroat environment? What drives our content feeds to show us the same stuff over and over again? Well, this is where the almighty algorithms come into play. Open up any form of social media app on your phone and you're essentially met with a ranking system. Every post is competing for a tiny slice of attention, and the winners are certainly not chosen by taste. They're chosen based on how likely they are to keep you watching. That is the unfortunate truth. Algorithms are designed to optimize for retention and not originality. Now, TikTok is the clearest example here. TikTok's recommender leans on interest signals more than who you follow, and short videos let it learn fast and adapt on the fly. Practically, that means if a video seems instantly familiar and instantly rewarding, it gets another chance. If it asks you to work even just a little, it will often get buried. And the feed is even narrower than it looks. The Washington Post rebuilt a simplified version of TikTok's recommender from the watch histories of more than 1,000 users and mapped how topics form separate clusters. Sure enough, it's almost like different TikToks living side by side. The result showed that users aren't just shown more of what they like. Rather, the system hides entire continents worth of content from you. The internet still contains everything, including innovative and creative efforts, but your feed becomes a corridor that blocks out most of the world. Now, of course, many argue that you are the one driving your personal algorithm on these platforms, not the other way around, and there's certainly an argument there. But practically, when it comes down to it, humans are simple creatures. And as evidenced by the explosion in popularity of all these algorithm-driven platforms, we simply can't help ourselves. So it wouldn't be fair to pick exclusively on TikTok here. Most other platforms run in a similar manner. Recommendations are driven by viewer signals and feedback to match videos to interests. And that makes total sense for product design. But culturally, it teaches creators one survival rule: don't surprise the machine, because the machine hates uncertainty. It can't predict how people will react to something truly new. It can predict how they'll react to something that resembles what already worked yesterday. And that's why everything tends to converge into a sort of templated format. The same types of hooks and the same jump cut pacing. The same captions, upload cadences, the same thumbnail language. But it's important to note that this is often not because creators lack imagination. The templates are rewarded specifically because they're measurable and lower risk. And you need look no further than the most successful YouTube channel of all time, Mr. Beast, for evidence of this. He refined his videos for all of these factors through rigorous data-driven testing to determine what makes a YouTube video successful. And frankly, it's hard to argue that it didn't work, considering his channel currently boasts over 460 million subscribers and counting. But there's also a darker element to this dynamic of an algorithmically driven feed. It started to mess with people's heads. The term algorithmic anxiety was coined in recent years, referring to that creeping feeling you get that your tastes are being shaped by an opaque system that you can't interrogate. Now, don't get us wrong, some wonderful and original stuff can still break through, and it does. More on that cheerful note later. And as we alluded to, you can in fact actively provide feedback to your algorithmic overlords by telling them you want to see less of certain types of content. That will alter your feed pretty sharpish. But again, the unique stuff is often forced to survive by turning into a pattern quickly. And once it's a pattern, the system is built to overwhelm us with copies until the edge is gone. And on that note, if you want a regular hit of unique and original coverage on current affairs, markets, and more, all delivered weekly, then you should check out the Coin Bureau Finance newsletter. It's absolutely free, and all you have to do is sign up by clicking the link in the description or scanning this QR code. No algorithmically pushed slop, just curated content on all of the stories that matter. And now, back to the video. Okay, so the novelty of the internet has likely been a net negative for pop culture and originality. But if we had to point the finger at any one sector that's leaning heavily into the death of originality, it would have to be the big movie sector. Imagine you're in a big-shot Hollywood boardroom. In that room, a prospective movie is viewed more as a financial position than as a form of art. The production budget is in the hundreds of millions, the marketing plan is worldwide, and if it misses, you don't just lose a bit of money, you blow a hole in next quarter's numbers. This risk management is one of the major drivers behind the originality drought in major productions that used to captivate audiences worldwide. But let's dig into that a bit. Now, one factor in all of this is a big change in consumer behavior over recent years. Fewer people are showing up to the cinema. So, studios need bigger guarantees when they actually do. Box office receipts in the US and Canada totaled about $8.6 billion in 2025, around 24% below the $11.3 billion level in 2019. Movie theatres haven't recovered to pre-pandemic levels, as domestic box office receipts consistently reached over $10 billion in the decade leading up to 2020. All the more worrying when you account for inflation since then. So, if audiences are going less often, the studios need to give themselves the best odds of securing profit. And this is how we end up with the modern studio approach. There are fewer mid-budget swings and many more blockbusters that have a constant loop of familiar IP. Of course, all stress-tested through test screenings and intense focus groups. And securing profit is no easy feat when the costs are so enormous. The major studios shouldn't be surprised to have to set aside $100 million or more in global marketing for the biggest titles. And once you're spending that kind of money, taking major risks seems daunting. So instead, they go for predictable wins. The big movies have to sell themselves fast through trailers and merchandise in 50+ countries. And this is why franchises like Marvel keep getting pumped out even when the reviews are often, well, lukewarm. The brand itself does the heavy lifting. And that global distribution only reinforces the whole phenomenon. Inside Out 2, for example, reportedly made about $1.7 billion worldwide, and roughly 62% of that total came from international markets. If most of your revenue comes from that diverse audience, you bias towards stories that translate well, big spectacles and simple stakes with characters people recognize. And this is why we're getting hit with a nostalgia loop that is seemingly never-ending. In 2025, the US domestic top 10 was overwhelmingly franchise-driven. 9 of the biggest movies were sequels, remakes, reboots, or adaptations, and the only clear original in the top 10 was Sinners. But audiences aren't just going along with this. Now they're getting hungry for smaller, more original stories, and not just in movies either. More on that, though, a little later. Before we get into that, though, we need to talk about another major factor in the originality dilemma, and perhaps the most contentious issue when it comes to the current state of content. That's right, AI. Right as audiences start demanding something new, we've unleashed a machine that can mass-produce good enough content at very little marginal cost. Generative AI has made copying incredibly fast and astoundingly cheap. At a technical level, large language models are trained on mountains of text, and they learn the patterns in that material. That's why they're so good at pastiche or imitation. Prompt them and they can mimic a genre with the appropriate tone and structure, even if a human needs to refine things here and there. Now, we're not bringing this up just to rip into AI. Used properly, AI can be a useful and powerful tool. The problem, however, is the incentives it plays into. When you can generate 20 versions of a chorus in 20 seconds, you stop wrestling with the uncomfortable first draft. When you can generate 10 thumbnail concepts instantly, you don't commit to a risky visual identity. And so, the goal of the creative process can be morphed from making something good to generating options and picking the safest one. As we talked about earlier, our social feeds reward familiarity. Therefore, AI becomes the perfect engine for this sameness, infinite variations clustered around what already works based on the data. AI also changes who can partake in the system. Nowadays, strictly speaking, one person can run a studio, scripts, captions, titles, cover art, even synthetic voices, and all at industrial speed. If you can generate endless variations, creativity starts to take a back seat in favor of solving a kind of optimization problem. You run tests, analyze the results, keep what spikes, and bin what doesn't. As mentioned, Spotify says over 100,000 new songs are released every day. And as generative tools scale that flood further, Spotify said that it had removed over 75 million spammy tracks over a 12-month period. That tells you how much low-quality or fraudulent material is now being pumped into the system. Even with aggressive enforcement, it's hard to know how much AI-driven slop still slips through. Books have been hit hard by this as well. We have now reached the stage where many Kindle ebooks simply list ChatGPT as an author or co-author. But of course, the real issue is that many AI-assisted books won't disclose this fact at all. And this problem has spread across all manner of sectors and content. But perhaps the most alarming part of all this is that AI is still in its infancy, and the feedback loop is only getting started. Scientific journals have begun to be populated with published research on model collapse. Now, this shows that when generative models are trained repeatedly on data generated by other models, outputs can degrade over generations. So, in plain English, humans are beginning to over-rely on AI to produce content, and they're filling the world with it via the internet. And as the internet becomes filled with a kind of synthetic average, future AI models learn from that average slop, and humans adapt further towards the same center because it's faster and safer. In other words, there's a real risk that AI is accelerating the world towards a death of originality, or, at the very least, partly responsible for crippling it. But we're going to avoid going full doom and gloom mode here. Despite all of the issues we just discussed, there is reason to be optimistic. Sure, there are a lot of factors working against creativity and originality, and it is becoming harder to find the gems amidst all of the noise thanks to distribution in the digital age. But that doesn't mean the original and creative stuff isn't shining. Let's consider movies, for example. Although major studios are focusing on repeatable blockbuster formulas, indie movies can win at the same time. On the blockbuster side of things, the money concentrates. As mentioned, the 2025 domestic box office, that's the US and Canada, crossed $8.6 billion in ticket sales. That means the big blockbuster machine is alive and well, even if it's not quite what it once was. At the same time, though, smaller studios can still do well financially while winning the cultural crown. At the 2025 Oscars, independent studios Neon and A24 dominated, with Neon's Anora winning 5 awards. We can turn to other sectors like gaming and see a similar dynamic at play meanwhile. PwC projected global video games revenue to hit around $300 billion by 2029, with 2025 seeing an estimated $237 billion. Even just 0.5% of that is about $1.18 billion, enough to keep a lot of smaller teams alive. And the awards in 2025 showed that indie games can still grab the main stage. The Game Awards said its 2025 show hit an estimated 171 million global live streams. And in front of that audience, Claire Obscure Expedition 33 won Game of the Year, while also winning Best Independent Game. Meanwhile, AAA games continue operations as usual. Battlefield 6 finished 2025 as the year's #1 best-selling game. So, we can have a year where Battlefield 6 tops sales, while a smaller, more unique game takes the biggest trophy on the biggest stage. So, this is just to say that although social feeds and other media are inundated with the familiar and unoriginal, there are gems out there if you're willing to look. Now, we're not saying that smaller entities will replace the blockbuster machine or major brands, and there will continue to be issues with discovery in a world that's simply flooded with content. But there is hope for a healthier ecosystem where originality has room to breathe on a smaller budget, and that is reason to celebrate. Okay, that is about all we have time for today, folks, but what do you think? Is the death of originality upon us, or is there sufficient success in the indie scene to keep the creative human spirit alive? Let us know your philosophical thoughts down in the comments. And if you want to learn about another big consumer issue the world is facing, then you should check out our video on the subscription economy right over here. That's all from me for now, though, so as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Guy, signing off.